PFC Jerry McNelly, United States Army, Vietnam. Jerry was drafted at the age of 19 and served in Vietnam during 1967 and 1968 with D Company of the 2nd Battalion, 12th Cav, 1st Air Cavalry Division. Jerry was assigned to a line platoon, although he was trained in mortars, and he carried a rifle through his entire time in Vietnam. And he's got one of the most gripping stories of all the Vietnam stories I've recorded, and Jerry is one of my heroes. Thank you, Brandon Glidden, for making it possible for others to hear Jerry's story. Thank you for your commitment to our country and for helping sponsor all of these important stories. Folks, with every page of history lost, these stories become more precious and valuable. So, Brandon, thank you. It is my great pleasure now to bring to you my complete interview with Jerry McNelly, July 14, 2006, in Phoenix, Arizona, on the Voices of History channel. Thank you for watching and sharing, and God bless you. Vietnam?
I went to Vietnam December 23rd, 1967, and I was then transported to An Khê, where I went through some in-country training, and then on January 2nd of 1968, I was flown by helicopter to the Quê Son Valley to a landing zone, or LZ, identified as LZ Leslie, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was dropped off or helicoptered in, and that's where I joined D Company, 2nd Battalion, 12th Cav, 1st Air Cav Division.
Okay, how old were you when you went to Vietnam?
19.
Okay. What were your feelings before you went in? Were you drafted?
Yes.
Okay. What were your peers thinking about Vietnam? I mean, what were you hearing and thinking? Were you feeling like you wanted to go serve your country, or is that how you were feeling?
I did. And I thought it would be an honor. My father served in the Pacific and then in Korea, and as my grandfather served, and it was just that if you're going to live in this country and you like it the way it is, then that's what you do. Isn't that the truth? And so I knew I was doing the right thing, and I knew that that even though the war was unpopular, I believed, and history will prove if someone takes the time to research it, as they have done, but it doesn't get much publicity. If you notice, the Communist Chinese stopped in Vietnam. It did not progress any further from there. And that's because of the young men and women that served in Vietnam.
So you're 19 years old, going into the service. Do you remember when you first stepped off the airplane in country, what you felt, what you smelt, what you saw? Can you tell me?
Well, coming from Phoenix, Arizona, when the commercial aircraft flown by military people landed in Cam Bay, and I got off of the aircraft, it was like being in Phoenix. It was just hot, only it was humid. Not as humid as it would, as I discovered later, as it was in the Central Highlands further north. I fully expected to get off of the aircraft and have to run for cover because of what the media had shown, and they only show the worst of the worst. And so I really thought that was what was going to happen. But I got off of the aircraft, and here was a military base that was enormous, and people driving around in civilian cars, and it wasn't bad at all. I was very comfortable in Cam Bay.
So what was your MOS? Were you a rifleman?
I was actually trained for mortars, and I can't recall. It's an 11
That's okay.
something. I don't remember what it was, but I was actually trained for mortars, but that never happened. When I arrived at LZ Leslie, I was actually assigned to a line platoon of D Company, and went to a bunker that I was assigned to that was on the perimeter of LZ Leslie, and I carried a rifle the entire time that I was in the field.
And your rank at that time?
I had achieved the lofty rank of PFC. I was at the bottom of the barrel. My need to know was stand here, shoot that way.
Now, you're part of the 1st Air Cav.
Yes.
Just give me a little bit of history. I mean, that was the Air Mobile Division?
Yes.
Okay, so you were obviously working with the Huey helicopters in some sort. You were involved with them.
Well, they transported us, and then they had gunships that supported us, and I had two feelings when I saw the helicopters. I knew when I got on one that I was going out somewhere, and this may be the last ride of my life, or they picked me up and I was going back to a camp somewhere, and it was like a mom giving you a hug and bringing you home. It was a good feeling when we were on the choppers and flying back to LZ Jane or Camp Evans or one of the larger bases, because you knew you were going to be relatively safe.
So the Huey was used for a lot of different purposes in Vietnam.
Many. It was a medical evac ship, it was a gunship, it was a transport ship for troops and supplies.
Can you tell me maybe the first time or one of the missions that you went on, a combat assault or whatever you were involved with, the procedure to pick you up, to take you in flight and then into an LZ? And who's on board?
Okay. Those were called combat air assaults. That's when a number of infantry or combat units from a small team to a large group would be transported by the Huey helicopters, and we would be flown out at low altitude to our particular LZ where we were going to do the landing, or what they called a combat air assault. The area where the helicopters are going to land would be pounded for several minutes by artillery, and it would stop within seconds of our arrival. And we would come in at low altitude, the dust hadn't even settled, and we would land in all of this dust, and the helicopters would come in so fast that if you didn't jump off, as it was just barely skimming the ground, it would take off, especially when you landed in what's called a hot LZ. You were being shot at the time that you landed. And if you didn't get off, the helicopter would leave and you'd still be on it, but all your buddies would be on the ground. So, and you didn't want that to happen, so you made sure that you got off so that you could be with your buddies. And when you're on the way out to the location, of course you know what to expect, and you have a level of fear, but it's dampened by the thoughts that go through your mind as to what you're going to do when you hit the ground, and try to prepare for the coming event.
So did you feel invincible at 19 years of age, did you say?
Well, I did until my first night in the field.
Baptism under fire? Tell me what happened.
Well, as I said, I landed at LZ Leslie at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was assigned to a bunker that was on the perimeter, and this was called a forward fire base. There were 3 105 Hallister artillery weapons on the hilltop, and I was assigned to a bunker that was in a ravine. And so anyway, I'm down at this bunker, and I'm told that at 1 o'clock in the morning I was to go up to the command post on the top of the hill and learn how to monitor the radio for an hour. Well, I was awakened, and I went up to the hill up to the CP at 1 o'clock, and there were a couple of guys there that were short timers, meaning they had very little time left in country. And they told me that they could not sleep and that I was going to need my rest, and they would stay up, just go on back to the bunker and get some rest. So I went back to the bunker, and in this bunker was a guy that was called a machine gunner. He had an M60 machine gun, and he had an assistant that was with him. And I was in this bunker with these guys, and I was sleeping outside the bunker. And sometime shortly after I returned, I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep. It may have been a few minutes, it may have been a couple hours, I just don't know. But all at once, the earth exploded with violence. There was incoming rockets, mortars. We were taking B-40 rockets from all the way around the perimeter. The entire perimeter was being attacked. And I, of course, immediately jumped into the bunker, and I looked down this ravine, and there was a human wave attack coming at us. And my mind was overwhelmed or shocked by what was going on, and I remember retreating back into the corner. I was so stricken with fear for a few seconds that I could not seem to make myself do what needed to be done as I watched the machine gunner fire nonstop until the barrel began to glow red. And at that point in time, I knew that I needed to do something, and I broke out of this shell of just shock or complete fear. I mean, I couldn't do anything for several minutes or seconds. I have no idea. It wasn't very long. But the barrel started to glow red, and it actually sagged from the heat. And so I joined the fight, and now I'm fighting out the side of the bunker because the enemy had already run over the top of us, and at that point in time they were in the camp. I'm shooting out the entrance to the rear as the enemy are going by us, and the bunkers on both sides of us had been blown up with what are called satchel charges. I was watching B-40 rockets come straight at us, but for some reason they'd go right over the top of us. They didn't hit the bunker. And then as the enemy breached the wire and got over the top of our bunker, and I was looking out the back of the bunker and shooting the enemy as they were moving up the hill, one of those 105 Hallisters shot point blank right over the top of our bunker with some kind of round that just wiped everybody out for an instant. And of course I couldn't hear anything at that point for a few minutes because the concussion was so great coming out of the end of that artillery round, or that artillery gun. At that point I'd run out of ammunition, and I don't know in the chaos what was going on. I just knew that I needed to get to the guys that were still alive. And I got out of the bunker and I tried to make it up the hill further to where there were other Americans, so I was in hand-to-hand a little bit, but I couldn't get there. There were just too many enemy, so I retreated back to the bunker that I was in. Even though I knew that they were going to blow it up, it was the only thing I had, the only place it was all that I had. So just as I got to the opening of the bunker and got ready to jump back in the bunker, I saw an NVA with a satchel charge, and I knew what it was. It's a bag full of explosives, and I saw him through the explosions going around. You could see his image in this light as he ran into the ammo bunker. And at that time the ammo bunker exploded, blowing part of the top of the hill off, and it knocked me into this bunker that I was in. And I couldn't hear anything, and I remember putting my face down, and that my eyes had come out of my head, and I had pushed them in, and I don't remember what happened after that. I don't know how long it lasted. I don't know. I just don't remember. I know that the next morning that at first light, their helicopters came in with other Cav guys, and they took the hill back, and then I was able to get out of the bunker. But I was brand new. I didn't know anybody. Nobody knew me. I was the only guy on my side of the line that didn't get killed or wounded. I don't know. It was just it's a tough way to start. So that day we got some new guys in, and or no, I'm sorry, we didn't get new guys that day. We had this unit that came in, this other Cav unit, and I'm not sure whether it was the 1st of the 5th or the 2nd of the 5th. There's some conflicting information in that, and I've never been able to find out. But we got this additional support. We were there for a couple of days. Then we were taken back to LZ Ross, which was 3 or 4 miles away, and rejoined the rest of the battalion. And then for the next week or 2 weeks, we did a number of sweeps through the valley, and we were involved in a number of large and up close and personal engagements with a superior enemy unit, superior to our battalion size.
NVA?
North Vietnamese, yes, NVA.
So you were...
And then from there, they put us on helicopters, our battalion, and they took us up to a place called Quang Tri, where we went, which is up on the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. And then from there we went by truck down to a place called Camp Evans, and we were at Camp Evans a few days, and then they took our unit down to a place called Hue, the city of Hue. And our unit, the 2nd Battalion, 12th Cav, was to move in and cut off the supply line. and that didn't work well. We were surrounded by the enemy, and because of weather, we couldn't get air support. Because of chain of command screw-ups, we had no artillery support, and it was just our battalion and about 2,000 enemy, and there were about 390 to 400 of us. And there's a book written about it, and it shows where we were surrounded, and they had us, the battalion commander received information from military intelligence or chain of command or wherever he gets his information from that we were on our own, there was no help coming, and that they had received enemy chatter, they had intercepted enemy communications, and that the next morning they were going to overrun our position and wipe us out because of our location outside the city of Hue, and it was preventing supplies from getting into the city, and it was preventing the enemy troops that were in the city of Hue from getting out. And so they needed to eliminate us so that they could achieve the goal of trying to hold Hue, which they were unable to do.
Now, you said you were a rifleman.
I was, okay. Yes.
You're in country a couple of weeks now at this time when you're in this encounter, or is this a few months into your tour?
That was, what I've shared with you right now is about 30 days. Maybe 3 weeks. I think it was about 3 weeks, but maybe 30 days.
Are you different now than you were day one, or is it just another day? Obviously, it wasn't a routine. I couldn't see how it could be routine, but how are you feeling about things? I mean, are you considered a newbie still, or is that what they call you when you come in country? Or?
It's an FNG. Funny new guy. Maybe the military didn't use that term, but something like that. By that time, I was pretty battle-hardened. We had replaced a lot of guys at that point. I was afraid, but I had become calloused to what was going on. Almost indifferent. I'd seen so many enemy and so many of our own guys killed or wounded that it was just another day in the field. And the Hue experience was very bad. We lost a lot of people at Hue in our battalion. Out of 398 guys in our battalion, starting January 2nd of 1968, with 398 kids, 40 days later, 305 were casualties. We had seen some combat in that 40-day period. Then for graduation from Hue, I got to go to Quezon. And then after Quezon, we went to the Oshaw Valley, and for your viewers that are Vietnam veterans, they know what all those were.
Hamburger Hill.
And then after that, I ended up with a recon team, and I did reconnaissance for a little while.
I don't know if you can remember before you went to Vietnam, but I mean, your ideas of combat and then actually being in combat and then it being over with, was combat what you had thought it was, or was it completely different, and were you trained for what you experienced?
The training you receive for combat is the best that you can receive, but it does not scratch the surface of the insanity of the actual encounter. It's, once it starts, all of the plans, all of the organization doesn't mean anything, because you don't know what areas of the line are going to hold and which areas are not. So you need good leadership, and you need brave kids. In my time, these kids to do what needed to be done in order to save your life and achieve whatever goal it was that the chain of command felt we were supposed to achieve.
Did you ever ask yourself, what am I doing here? Did you feel a strong sense of purpose and duty to God and country over there?
Yes, I did. And I knew that even though I didn't know the names of these guys who were around me, I knew that I couldn't let them die. And so I did whatever I needed to do. I've been decorated, and I never even got the decorations because I don't even know what it was I did. I didn't do anything special. I didn't do anything different than anyone else that was there. We did what we needed to do in order to survive and accomplish the goal, whatever that goal may have been. Like I said, I was a PFC. My my orders were to stand here and shoot that way. So that was about it.
Can you, as you're comfortable to tell me, can you take me into a situation in Way or the Ashall Valley or Quezon where you were involved in combat, maybe what was happening, just give me a little bit?
Well, again, because I didn't know what the objective was, I just was one of the line members. What I was doing was just a repeat of what I'd done the day before or what I expected to do the next day. We, with the exception of the city of Way, we would move in units out through the jungle until we would encounter the enemy, and then we would try to wipe them out. And we were always moving some direction for some purpose, whether it would be to cut off an enemy unit or to engage an enemy unit that military intelligence believed that was on their way somewhere, and we were to engage them before they got there. Or, my memory is blocked with a lot of that. I would love to know what happened. I would love to be able to talk to guys who can remember, but I had become an animal, really. I didn't have feelings. When you have so many around you that are killed, you don't have time to mourn for them, you don't have time to worry about them, you can't think about them. And this could be somebody that you just had C rations with an hour earlier, and now they're gone. And if you don't stay focused on what you need to do, you're going to die too. And it happened so much in such a short period of time that I had no feelings towards it. I really had become dead inside.
So once you were helicoptered in, then it was basically moving within the units. You're not being helicoptered from this place through the jungle. You're going through the jungle. You got machetes cutting grass, or tell me about the landscape.
I was in the Central Highlands, which is primarily hilly jungle, mountainous areas. And sometimes we were in what was called 3-canopy jungle, which are 3 layers of vegetation. It was very thick, and we would use machetes when we were in that type of vegetation. Generally, we tried to get around that vegetation because it was so hard to go through. When we would move through the jungle, you'd have what was called a point man, and the point man would be the guy that was out front, first guy to get killed. And what he would do is he would move along and try to, of course, find the enemy before they found us, but he would also try to find a path that we could move that was in the direction we needed to go, that would be a path of least resistance and yet still provide the protection necessary in the event that we did have a firefight or an encounter. And I was generally, well, that's not true. In one of the engagements in the city of Way, we believed there were going to be tanks, and I carried what was called a 90 recoilless rifle, which has an anti-tank rocket in it, and it's heavy. And I carried that thing for a couple of days until it got shot up when we walked into an ambush, and the recoilless rifle actually took some hits and we couldn't use it anymore. I carried an M60 machine gun for a couple of days when the gunner got, I don't know, it was a couple of days or a couple of weeks, I just don't remember, but I carried that for a while. That was kind of heavy. Weighs 26 pounds empty. And then you put a 40-pound pack on your back and some ammunition, and you walk in 110-degree temperatures with 95 or 100% humidity, and you're going up and down this jungle with this thing, and it's hot. You notice it. That was one. But apart from all that, on a side note, one of the things that I was in awe of was how beautiful the jungle was. It was such a I could not believe how pristine the leaves and the plants and the flowers. It was just surreal. It was so beautiful. And I remember clearly thinking, how can all of this insanity happen in all of this beauty? It just didn't make sense to me. And what was the purpose? Why are we doing this? What is it? If we're not going to win this, then why are we doing this? I mean, why don't we go out and save all of this beauty? And apparently someone else higher up the rank of PFC had a different opinion. So I remember one morning with the recon team. We were walking along the side of a hill, and we were looking down into a valley, and it was early in the morning, and there was a mist down the valley, and it was beautiful jungle all the way around this valley with grass down below, and there was an army unit that was packing up and getting ready to move out, and we could see them down below, and to me it looked like a Hollywood film. I mean, it just didn't even look like it could be real. It was the conflict of the two were so different, to have this war, these men ready for war in the middle of all that beauty. It was very pretty. I enjoyed the wildlife that was in the jungle. They didn't know who we were. They didn't know what we were. And it was not uncommon for gorillas or little antelope or different things to come up to us and just see what we were. And I enjoyed that. That was my vacation while I was in this insanity.
What a contrast.
What a contrast.
Yeah, boy. So let me ask you a question about the Ashall Valley. Is that where what was called Hamburger Hill, the battle there? Is that?
I think that's incorrect, but I don't know that for a fact. The 173rd Airborne is the one that did Hamburger Hill, and that happened, I think, I'm not positive. And that happened at a different time. That was, I think that was in '67. And I'm not positive that whether or not it was in the Ashall Valley. I don't know. I was very fortunate in the Ashall in that I was up on a hill above kind of all the stuff that was going down in the valleys, and so I didn't have a large number of heavy engagements as so many did.
Well, are you guys, in my mind I'm thinking, I've talked to the World War II guys, the Korea guys, and now the Vietnam veterans, and I'm thinking, okay, you're walking in the jungles, maybe it's quiet. I mean, you got your point man, you encounter the enemy, and then there's all hell break loose, and you're all in a line. Are you scattered? Are you in a group? What are you doing? I mean,
well, you're in somewhat of a straight line, or a little bit of a broken line as you're moving along. And once the engagement begins, then the first thing that happens, of course, is everybody gets down. You don't want to be a standing target, while whoever's in charge, whether it be a small unit with a sergeant in charge, or whether it be a platoon or company with an officer, the first thing we do is try to assess the location of the enemy and how large a unit they have, and then the commanders would move us around and flank the enemy, or move us from wherever they needed to move us. And the guys that were in front that made that had the initial engagement would stay there, and they would move into like a line, if you will, and fight from that position. And of course, a bunch of the guys would go up and help them. And then those that were in the middle or towards the rear would move around and try to flank the enemy and on one or two sides. And that would be the traditional engagement. We would either all move to the line and then move forward or we would move around to the side and try to hit them from two sides.
So are you firing an M16?
I was, yes. It's called an AR-15.
How much ammo do you have on you? Do you get resupplied? How do you do that? Who resupplies you?
Glad you would ask that. I'll start at the beginning. When you first arrive in country, you have all of these thoughts that you need letter writing material and shaving equipment and all these great things that you carry around with you. After your first firefight, all that stuff goes away. You fill your pack with ammunition, water, ammunition, food, and ammunition. Because when you're engaged, there's a lot of times it takes them a long time to get the wounded guys out. Sometimes 2 or 3 hours can go by, and if you're in heavy engagement, you're going through the ammunition pretty fast. And so it could be a while before you get ammunition. So you replace all of those comfort items with the basics that you need to survive in the encounter. And because I had had so many encounters in such a short period of time, riding home or shaving or brushing my teeth wasn't relevant to anything. What was relevant was surviving these encounters and making sure I didn't run out of ammunition. Because I did that my first night. That was not good.
How could you ration your ammo if you're in a heavy engagement? You really can't, can you? I mean,
no, you just make sure that when you fire, well, when you first encounter the enemy, you lay out a field of fire to try to that's greater than what the enemy is giving you. And then after that initial violent burst of ammunition and M79s and everything else that we fire at them, then the shooting tailors off a little bit, and then you get a little more specific about what you're shooting at. You don't want to just shoot at trees and bushes. You want to try to make sure that there's a target there, because you don't know how long the engagement's going to last, and you don't know if you're going to be hit from the back or the side. You don't know where the enemy are. And so after that initial violence, you get a little more particular about where you're going to fire and what you're going to fire at. It doesn't stop. You become more focused, and you try to figure out, you look for flashes because you can't see the enemy, so you watch for muzzle flashes and you shoot into the flashes.
Were there times where you had to take ammo off maybe one of your wounded soldiers or a dead soldier? I mean,
many times, especially at way.
That's part of the survival, because you have to have the ammo. I mean,
got to have the ammo, and they're not going to need it anymore, so you just take it. Yes.
So when you're in combat, are you looking for direction all the time? Are you on your own for a while, and then the sergeant or the platoon leader says, let's move out? Or, I mean, are you just kind of in a check mode? You know, what are you just, does that make sense?
Yes, when it first starts, you know, that's a great question. When it first starts, the initial explosion of violence, the first thing you do is you try to protect yourself. You get down. Then the next thing you try to do is figure out where it's coming from and where your guys are relevant to that attack. What side of the line, or where is that attack coming from? And then you try to move to that position. But you move to that position with the guys that you're with. You don't go by yourself as a rule. There are times that happens, but not as a rule. And so my squad and platoon would move into a combat position to engage the enemy wherever it was needed. But the goal was always to set up a perimeter. So if your encounter was to the side, well, the guys that were on that side of the line would, of course, engage the enemy, and several people would join them, but the others would set up a perimeter so that if we were attacked from another side, we would be prepared for it. So to say that there was one specific way it happened, it was relevant to the encounter, whether we just lined up and charged forward, or we set up a perimeter, or we flanked them. I mean, it was always a commander's call.
Are you talking with each other, or are you saying, keep your head down, look out, or cover me? Or, I mean, is it, you know, and then if you're on the ground, initially when it starts, you don't shoot from the ground probably, so how do you find a position to start shooting? Or do you find something to hide behind, or what?
Well, when you're on the ground, it doesn't take you long to figure out where the firing's coming from, and you fire in that direction. You just make sure you're not hitting your own guys. And then after that first few seconds, especially when you've had an opportunity to have experience, it just comes natural. You know what to do and where you need to be in order to be most effective. So you would, when the encounter would begin, if it were on my side of the line or in my area of the, we would move towards that firing. But even though we would be down, we would move towards that firing till we reached a point where we were able to have a lot of guys that were on that line, if you will. While the other troops were either preparing to flank or set up a perimeter, depending on the type of engagement. So
you've got small arms fire coming in, or artillery, or both?
No, the only time we had artillery that I'm aware of is when we were in Quezon, and sure feel sorry for the guys that are on the receiving end of that on a continuous basis. That's really insane. You can hear the artillery in the distance, but you don't know where they're shooting till it comes in. And we were hit with artillery several times in Quezon, and in fact all night long, one night our position was hit, and it's pretty exciting stuff.
Are they using AK-47s, Thompsons? What are they using, the NBA?
Most of my engagements, well, that's not right either. In operations in the Central Highlands, when we were moving out and engaging the enemy in the jungle, it was primarily AK-47s and AK-50 machine guns. If they had other weapons, I was not familiar with it. Sometimes they would have small mortars that they would use, depending on the size of the enemy element that we had encountered. when we were in larger firefights, battalion or larger firefights, it was not uncommon for the enemy to have rockets. They used a lot of B-40 rockets, which is a shoulder-held rocket. Fortunately, they're not very accurate, but they do cause a lot of damage. Or at least they weren't accurate in that day. I'm sure by now they've improved on them. We would, when we were in large encounters, we would have a lot of rockets, mortars would hit us, AK-47s, machine guns, and often they would be close enough that they would throw grenades at us.
Tell me about the Hueys and you're assisting possibly with the wounded as medevacs would come in, or as gunships or whoever had to evacuate the wounded. Tell me what you remember about helping with any of that.
Again, depending on where you were in the perimeter of an engagement, the helicopters would come in on that side of the perimeter that was not receiving fire. And if I happened to be on that side of the perimeter in which the medevac chopper came in, then I would help put the wounded on the ship.
Did that happen a lot with you, or just a couple times, or remember helping out?
You know, I kind of blocked that out. I mean, I know that I did it, but I kind of blocked that out.
Have you seen a movie that has come close to what you experienced there?
We Were Soldiers is the closest to my experience.
And what part of the movie in particular maybe was realistic?
There was not anything in that movie that I have not seen or experienced. Everything in that movie I have experienced, including having the enemy stand right on top of you in the middle of the night. I've experienced that as well.
That was your first day with the bunker?
No, they overran us that time, but I was out in the jungles and the enemy walked over us, and I wished I could tell you when it was. I just can't remember. It all kind of runs together. I'm really looking forward to discovering the chain of events and when we were, wherever we were. I just started looking up some guys that were with my unit and to get their recollection on what happened. I came home and I don't know if it's a preservation mechanism, I'm not sure what it is, but I tried not to and to remember. There was too much, I think.
How do you think Vietnam changed you, Jerry? I mean, obviously, did it give you a better perspective of life? Did you get cynical when you came home? Or now, so many years later, you're dealing with post-traumatic stress? Or just give me a little bit about that.
I was happy to come home. I was glad it was over. I thought a lot about the guys that were still there. My experience was such that I wasn't going to go back. Just wasn't going to go back. But I understand why guys do. I came home from Vietnam and I was happy all the time. I laughed a lot, I smiled a lot, I didn't get mad about anything. There just wasn't anything on America to be mad about. I'm still that way. I mean, it isn't that I don't have the feelings of anger, because that's a natural emotion, but you know, I look at everything that happens to me and I compare it to what I experienced, and there just isn't anything that happens here that has such significance that it's worth being upset about.
How about transitioning from combat one moment and then a civilian life? I mean, was there a transition there?
I was very, very fortunate. I was very fortunate. In July of 1968, I was taken out of the jungle and I was moved down to a place called Phan Rang. So I only spent 6 months in the jungle. And then I went down to an R&R beach called Phan Rang, and I spent the rest of my tour on this R&R beach, where I had a lot of, and the story of how that happened is very important, I think. I'll share that with you in a second. Well, where I was on the beach, I met people who had not been in combat. I met Air Force guys and others who had no idea what combat was about. So I had several months to socialize and kind of adjust to what it would be like being in a social atmosphere. So I know there are guys who were in combat one day and in the streets of Phoenix a week later, of America a week later, and that's not a good transition. My biological father had been in Korea and, he'd been in the Pacific in World War II and then Korea. And he came home with something that people didn't understand at that time, and it was post-traumatic stress disorder, but nobody knew what it was. And he was violent and drank. And my mother did something, I was 5 years old at this time, or 6, maybe 6. But my mother did something that was unacceptable behavior at that time. She divorced him for the safety of herself and her 2 little children, myself and my younger brother. I had not seen my father in about 15 years. My grandmother, my biological father's mom, found out that I was in Vietnam in harm's way. And a father I had not seen for 15 years re-enlisted in the service, filled out all the paperwork, put himself in harm's way in Vietnam to get me out of the field. And I just found out about that about 4 years ago. And that was kind of the beginning of my need to find out what goes on. What happened there? Where was I? I mean, these kinds, if my son were there, I would go back in a second. And I understand that. But I hadn't seen this man in 15 years. And I saw him about 2 years ago, and he said it was the only thing he had to give me. He had nothing else for me because he's not a rich man. He doesn't have anything. He's an American throwaway. Thank you for your heroism. Now leave us alone. And he lives alone out in Oklahoma, and it's sad. It's sad. But that's what he did for me, and that's why I ended up getting out of the jungle. Nobody knew why I got out of the field. I didn't know why I got out. I was out on an operation with a recon team. Helicopter came out and got me. I thought that something bad had happened stateside because there were, what could you do wrong in the jungle to go to jail for? I wasn't being arrested. So I thought I know that when a parent dies or something, that they would take the guys out of the Red Cross and take you out of the field, and you would come home for 30 days to be here for the funeral and whatever was happening stateside. And that's what I believed happened. But once I ended up down in Cameron Bay and was reassigned to another unit, that's when I knew I wasn't going home, but no one knew why I had been, no one knew why I had been reassigned. Kind of a side note here. You were asking me about my feelings and what had happened to me. I had a helicopter pick me up in the field, in the jungle in the Central Highlands, that took me back to LZ Jane. At LZ Jane there was a Chinook, that's a helicopter with 2 blades, a bigger cargo type, and it flew me down to Phu Bai. At Phu Bai I got on an airplane. Each time I got off, when I got off of the helicopter that brought me from the jungle back to LZ Jane, there was an officer. And he told me I was to get on that helicopter. So I went over and got on the helicopter. I got off of the helicopter in Phu Bai, and there was another officer standing there. And he said, "There's a plane waiting for you." So I went over and got on this plane, and it took off, and I landed in Cameron Bay. And when I got in Cameron Bay, there was a Jeep with 2 MPs sitting on it, and they were waiting for me. So I still have all my I have my backpack. I'm ready for battle. I mean, I haven't turned anything in or given anybody anything. I'm ready for battle. And the MPs put me in the Jeep and said, "Let's get something to eat, and we'll take you over to the company commander after a while." So I went to a mess hall. This is the first time in 6 months that I'd had hot food on a table. And I went through, and this was the time that I knew I was not well. This was that defining moment that I knew that I had turned into an animal. I went through this line with all my combat stuff on, watching as these guys would scoop this food out and put it on my plate. Everybody in the place was spit, shine, and polished. It was an MP unit. They were all looking good, except me. And I remember looking at the guy who had put some mashed potatoes on my plate, and when he put this spoonful on my plate and told me to move on. And I remember when I looked at him, he didn't say anything. He just picked up the spoon and gave me some more, and he said, "Do you want more?" I didn't have to say anything to him. I don't know what was in my eyes, but I visibly saw him scared. Now I'm at a table, and I have every cold drink they make. I have Kool-Aid and milk and cold water and sodas, and I had everything in front of me, and I had this giant plate of food. These 3 MPs came and sat with me, and I found myself holding my arm around my food down, and I remember this so well. I had a chicken leg, and I was scooping mashed potatoes with my fingers into my mouth. And there was nobody in this place talking. They were all staring at me. And that was the time I thought to myself, what has happened to me? What has happened to me? And I pushed the food away, and a guy said, "Come on, we'll go get you some clean clothes. The mess hall's open all day." So he took me over to the shower place, and he went and got some clean clothes for me, and I showered, and I used the entire bar of soap, and I washed my hair, and all the shampoo I used all the shampoo, and I had hot water, and I just stood there trying to rationalize what has happened to me. And I got some clean clothes, and I went back to the mess hall, and I tried to be a little more civil. I put my stuff down. I never let go of my weapon, though. There wasn't anybody in there armed but me, and no one was taking my weapon. As much as I was trying to rationalize the fact that I'm in an environment that I don't need this, I was not going to let it go. And so anyway, I went through the chow line, and I ate, and they took me and introduced me to the company commander, and I was reassigned to a security unit down by Phan Rang Air Base at a R&R center. And I spent the rest of my time eating in a mess hall and sleeping in a bed and had air conditioning, and I was the same rank as I was in the jungle and got the same pay. I just had it made. It was great. It was a wonderful part of the tour, and I met lots and lots of civilians. And in fact, the place was so safe that senior officers at Cam Bay would put on civilian clothes and come down there with girlfriends, and we'd see them down there all the time. It was a very different. It was hard to believe I was still in Vietnam. It was so different.
Jerry, what does Vietnam mean to you today? Does it have any significance in your life? What you went through? I mean, I know it does, but just as a war, as an event, I mean, what does it mean to you today?
Vietnam is a point in history that was necessary from a communist expansion standpoint. It was unnecessary because of the way it was handled. Vietnam taught this country lots of lessons. The Vietnam veteran has done more for this country than any internally, politically, for the veterans than any other generation before us. We've accomplished more for the to have the government help the veterans than anyone else has. If you look at the statistical data of the Vietnam veteran, the Vietnam veteran community has a larger percentage of individuals that own their own companies, that have been financially successful, that have moved forward in this country to achieve great things on a percentage basis than any other group in the history of the nation. And we continue to do so. And one of our big efforts right now is to forward a project, to forward the PTSD assistance, the post-traumatic stress assistance for the returning vets, those that are fighting for our safety now, our freedom now, so that they can get that help when they come home, not 2 or 3 divorces later, not after who knows what happens. And so we're trying to change that paradigm, and we're having success, but it's not happening fast enough. It should have happened yesterday, but it won't, because you have people's personalities and their desire for power, or the amount of money they have to throw at it, is they'd rather spend it on something else. And it's sad. It's sad. This, I wished I know who made the quote, but the country that forgets its soldiers is the country that itself will, its veterans. The country that forgets its veterans will itself soon be forgotten. And you watch the things that are going on in this country and you wonder, are we at that point? And it's heartbreaking to see what's going on. I know the Vietnam veteran is the group that stands up and tells all of these tree huggers, you spit on these kids and you're going to hear from us. That's a guarantee. We're not going to. When I came home after my experience, I was spit on. I was called a baby killer. I didn't kill any babies. I wasn't even around where babies were. And I don't know anybody that did. I mean, it was insane, like, to come back to that environment. We're not going to let that happen again. It's just not going to happen.
Jerry, what does the American flag mean and represent to you?
The American flag is the only symbol on this planet that represents the opportunity for any human being who plays by the rules to achieve anything on planet Earth they want to achieve. You can be the greatest artist, you can get as rich as you want to be, you can be the greatest teacher, you can research and do anything you want when that flag is what you pledge yourself to. And there isn't anywhere else on the planet where that flag means that, where their flag means that. That's why they don't like our flag. Too much freedom. The insanity of the people today, they're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. That's how stupid they are.
Tell me about freedom. What does freedom mean, or what is freedom to you, Jerry?
The ability to do, as long as I'm not hurting anyone else, the ability to do anything I want to do whenever I want. And I can tell you there aren't very many countries in the world where you can do that. I can watch, in this country you can watch, not me, I would never take this position, but in this country you can watch people chastise a war they don't understand, and you couldn't do that in any other country. You can, in this country, you can stand and preach communism and the downfall of this country because you have the right to do that. But when it comes right down to it, we're not going to let that happen. But you have the right to do that if you want to. That's what freedom is. Freedom is the ability of you to be able to do this interview whenever and wherever you want. And it's only restricted by your desire to set the program up. The government isn't going to come in and dictate what you ask us or what our answers are. They're not going to see the video and edit out those things they don't want the public to hear. That's freedom.
What would you say to a young person today about the price of freedom? You saw men die, wounded on the battlefield. What would you say? Tell me about the price of freedom.
The price of freedom is written on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. The price of freedom is Arlington Memorial. The price of freedom are those that are willing to lay down for someone their life for someone they never met, so that that person that they never met would have the right to do whatever it is they want to do. That's what freedom is. And that's why that's why I have such great admiration for our young soldiers doing what they're doing. And the sad part is the media doesn't tell you the hundreds of thousands or millions of things that go on over there day in and day out that are good for that country, that those people want us there. And you see, when you go online and on the computer and you get information from these groups individually or collectively, these military units that are over there, and you see the families they're feeding and the houses they're building and the schools and the hospitals and all of the things that are happening, and then you see some nut that runs out there and blows it all up. I mean, how hard is it to make a choice when that's happening? And then after these soldiers build this hospital, they don't keep it and say it's ours. They give it to those people and say, here's an opportunity for you to be better, to have a better life. Amazing. Wonderful kids.
Have you been back to the wall then? It sounds like you've been at the wall, or have you ever been there?
Every year, I do what is called Run for the Wall. It's a motorcycle ride. It's a 10-day motorcycle ride from Ontario, California to Washington, D.C. And the ride ends at the wall. And first time I went back, I thought it would be very hard. But I've been there 3 times now. And I find I have I'm dead inside. I see the names on the wall, but I'm just dead inside. I'm unable to reach the emotion to let me deal with that issue. But I'm so glad that I'm there to help others that are, because that's what the motorcycle ride is about, is to help these guys that have come home and to forward the POWMIA issue and to keep America aware that the veterans in this country are why we speak English and why we have the schools and why we have everything we have. And we've been pretty successful at doing that. It gets bigger every year. We have thousands of riders that go. And it's amazing to watch the face of America as we move across America. It's wonderful.
I want to talk to you more about that after the interview. We're almost
Okay.
done, but are you proud that you're a Vietnam veteran?
Very, very proud. And I would go to Iraq if I could. And if I had to sit in Iraq and type at a typewriter to allow the young soldiers who are physically capable to go out and do, or I would go there and work in whatever I needed to work in, I would go help. I would do it in a heartbeat.
Have people thanked you for your service to our country?
Starting 3 years ago was the first time I'd been thanked. Maybe it was 4 years ago. It was 3 or 4 years ago. It was the first time I'd been thanked. I've been married a couple of times, and my last ex-wife used to tell me, forget it, nobody cares. They don't even want to hear about it. And I was dealing with things I couldn't understand, emotions I couldn't understand. And I understand why she moved on. If I were naive to all of that, I might have done the same. But it didn't leave me feeling abandoned.
I just had a thought, as we're just about out of time here, but I've heard when the space shuttle astronauts, or when people would go to the moon the first few times and they'd come back to the Earth, they got really depressed. They just had nothing to look forward to. They'd achieved the ultimate. Now I guess they train them to set big goals for when you get back, you know, but it almost reminds me of maybe what some of you guys experienced. You went through this horrendous, tragic, traumatic thing in your life. You became an animal, you come back to society, and then years later it hits you and you go through these emotions. It's like you went through this thing, and now what's happening to me? I mean, is that not a great way to describe it, but it almost seems like there's a similarity in what you've experienced. And I think it's amazing for you to, you know, I think there is a mechanism for you to stay sane. I guess you just can't remember everything. I mean, come on, you know.
I talk to people who can give you dates and times and names and places, and I look at them in awe. And how can you remember that? How do you know? Of course, they weren't out in the field with us. These are other people that were in base camps or support people. And believe me, their jobs were important. Without them, we wouldn't have survived. But it's amazing to me how clear the memories are of some and how garbled they are of those of us that was out there in meeting the enemy up close and personal.
What do you want people to, or what should people remember about Vietnam?
Wow, that's a great question. Could I have a few weeks to think about an answer?
You don't have to answer it now. Just, you know, I think there's you've referred to some things, but you personally, I mean, what do you want us to remember about Vietnam?
What I want America to know, the most important thing in my mind at this point in time, without having an opportunity to think it through, and I'd probably come up with the same conclusion, those kids that went over there and fought for this country are every bit as important as any soldier that ever went to any war for this country from the Civil War on. Their commitment to this country, every aspect of it, every single one of them are heroes, just like they were in every other war. And it's unfortunate that it took so many years for America to recognize that.
Can you do one more thing for me? From where you're seated, I asked the veterans to do this. I would ask that you give a salute into the camera when I tell you. Is that, you comfortable with that?
Yeah, do you want me to stand up? Or
I'd
just...
rather, because of the microphone and stuff, let's just stay right there, but
Okay.
I've asked everybody to do it. Okay, right into the camera. Great, thank you. Stay right there. I'm gonna take a picture of us, okay?
Okay.